Welcome to The Explainer. Let's jump right in, because today we are unpacking some truly intense and totally contrasting source materials. We're looking at the ultimate systemic shocks. We're talking extreme, catastrophic events, but we're examining them from two completely opposite angles. On one hand, we've got these deep, complex mathematical documents that actually propose we can predict these disasters using algorithms. And on the other hand, we have some highly charged political commentary from a YouTube source looking at how the threat of a nuclear catastrophe is allegedly being discussed and even weaponized in the public sphere. It's this wild collision of data science and geopolitical rhetoric, and we are going to break it all down impartially for you.
To make sense of all this, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll dive into predictive algorithms and the whole concept of black swans. Second, we'll look at the political rhetoric around a potential nuclear strike. Third, we're going to explore the theses of certain Ukrainian experts as presented by our sources. Fourth, we'll outline the commentator's theory of a nuclear provocation. And finally, we'll bring the whole thing together by looking at what's called the predictive shield doctrine.
All right, Section 1, Predictive Algorithms and Black Swans. Let's start by looking at the scientific framework our sources are using to anticipate massive, totally unpredictable shocks to a system.
At the very core of this math is the concept of a black swan. You've probably heard the term. It's basically an event that just comes entirely out of nowhere, completely defies normal expectations, and brings severe world-altering consequences with it. In the context of our technical sources today, things like sudden ballistic bombardments or nuclear attacks fall squarely into this category. They are the ultimate systemic shocks. But here's the thing, the mathematical papers we're reviewing make a really bold claim. They say these events aren't actually random at all.
Because while a black swan might look like a sudden, unpredictable storm from the outside, the technical documents surrounding a software complex called RALPH-1 argue that these events actually have hidden structural precursors. They aren't just lightning strikes out of a clear blue sky. No, they are the result of building pressure in a system, and that system could be geological, economic, or even military.
So how does this actually work in the real world? Well, according to the source documents, the RALPH-1 algorithm uses something called stochastic resampling and Kolmogorov-Arnold-Spline networks, or CAN networks, to predict these exact types of shocks. Take a look at this forecast from April 2019. The algorithm reportedly identified a severe structural anomaly in the data right before armed drones attacked the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia. It literally anticipated the shock to global oil prices before the physical attack even took place.
The absolute crucial point here is that the algorithm claims to intercept what the author calls the echo of the future resonance. I know, it sounds a bit like sci-fi, but by tracking really complex data anomalies, it maps out the impending crisis as a logical expectation rather than a sudden, shocking surprise. And the documents actually note that this exact mathematical capability to predict macrostructural collapses and bombardments was formally reviewed by Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council back in September 2022.
Which brings us to Section 2, Rhetoric around a nuclear strike. Now we're shifting gears completely. We've seen the mathematical attempts to prevent extreme events, but how are these very same catastrophic threats being discussed in the political and media spheres?
And this leads us to a pivotal question from our YouTube source: what exactly is the deal with Zelensky's administration regarding these threats? Or, to put it another way, что там про Зеленского? What is the actual rhetoric coming from that camp? We're going to impartially examine the claims made by YouTube commentator Nikolai Lilin, who offers a highly critical, opposing view on exactly how these catastrophic risks are being managed politically. So, the commentator, Nikolai Lilin, makes a pretty bold claim. He asserts that instead of trying to avoid a systemic shock, the current administration in Ukraine is actively attempting to desensitize the public to it. Lilin claims there is a deliberate media campaign aimed at normalizing the whole concept of a nuclear strike, essentially stripping away the natural public fear of such an apocalyptic event.
To back this up, Lilin points to alleged public rhetoric, stating, quote, "A nuclear strike on Ukraine is a very positive version of events, a kind of great Ukrainian paramoga, which translates to victory." According to the video source, figures like former Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba, alongside his fiancée in a social media video, are publicly framing a nuclear strike not as a horrific humanitarian disaster that we should fear, but incredibly, as something to be welcomed as a strategic win.
Moving to Section 3, Thesis of Ukrainian Experts. The commentator argues that this isn't just some isolated rhetoric, but a narrative that is being systematically justified by aligned experts.
Our YouTube source highlights that on Ukrainian television, experts are allegedly presenting mass destruction purely as a geopolitical tool. The video specifically zeroes in on the statements of Andrei Dlygash, who is identified as the co-founder of the Center for Economic Recovery. Lilin claims that Dlygash actually urged the public to view a hypothetical Russian nuclear strike as a blessing in disguise, which is just a staggering geopolitical claim when you think about it.
The specific logic attributed to Dlygash goes exactly like this. It will force the deoccupation of territories and cause the immediate disintegration of the Russian Federation. The YouTube commentator points out that in this line of rhetoric, the sheer tragedy and massive loss of life from a nuclear strike are entirely glossed over. Instead, it's viewed purely as a tactical price you pay for a desired political outcome.
So let's follow this step-by-step logic exactly the way the commentator describes it. Step 1. A nuclear incident happens on Ukrainian soil. Step 2. The resulting mass casualties and massive radiation provoke unprecedented global pressure on the Kremlin. And finally, Step 3. This leads to Western retaliation and ultimately the total collapse and division of the Russian Federation. Lilin's main critique is that these experts are treating the physical territory and population like pieces on a disposable game board, gambling millions of lives to trigger this calculated geopolitical chain reaction.
That brings us to Section 4, Theory of Nuclear Provocation. And this leads right into the commentator's ultimate and, honestly, highly controversial conclusion about why this rhetoric is supposedly being broadcasted in the first place.
Lilin theorizes that this media normalization isn't just careless talk. It is deliberate preparation. He claims that Zelensky's administration and its Western backers are spreading this specific narrative to prepare the Ukrainian population for an intentionally triggered sacrificial apocalyptic scenario.
The commentator starkly summarizes his belief with this quote: "After such a provocation, NATO will be able to accuse Russia of using nuclear weapons and use this episode to justify its preventative nuclear strike." So, the source argues that Ukraine is essentially being set up as a sacrificial offering, a geopolitical pawn meant to force direct NATO intervention and spark a massive continental war.
Let's move to Section 5, Predictive Shield Doctrine. We're going to bring the two halves of this explainer together now. We've just seen the political commentary on weaponizing chaos. Now let's return to those technical source documents to see how mathematical algorithms actually propose resolving this exact type of kinetic escalation. So we are left with a pretty stark contrast between our sources today. On one side, you have the political allegation of weaponizing chaos, panic, and holding a monopoly on information for geopolitical leverage. And on the flip side, the technical documents present the mathematical goal of using data to entirely eliminate the element of surprise, basically preventing the threat altogether.
These scientific sources propose what they call the predictive shield doctrine. This doctrine combats the asymmetry of information. It argues that nuclear blackmail relies entirely on the opponent being blind and terrified of unpredictable chaos. But by making predictive algorithms like Ralph 1 public, you replace that fear with mathematical transparency. By detecting the logistical, energy, and geoelectrical anomalies that absolutely have to precede a major strike, you detect the threat way before it reaches critical mass. You completely nullify the surprise factor.
The technical argument really just boils down to this: demystification as an antidote to kinetic escalation. The source papers argue that a strike only makes strategic sense if the enemy is actually caught off guard. When an opponent's preparations are mathematically exposed in advance for the whole world to see, their monopoly on the shadows just disappears. By demystifying the threat, the algorithm conceptually neutralizes it right there on the spot.
Which leaves us with a final, really profound question to ponder based on everything we've reviewed today. In a world where extreme, catastrophic events can seemingly be both mathematically predicted to save lives and politically weaponized to achieve power, which force is ultimately going to dictate our future? The objective math of the observer or the rhetoric of the state? That's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and remember to keep questioning the data around you. See you next time.